Hello there, this is Jill, Wigmore-Welsh. I've just discovered that I have a rare skill and talent that I will show you in a minute. I'm shocking and surprising myself with my capabilities. Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to show you here, I've written this down, I hope you can see it, is look, it says Physio and Feldenkrais. I'm really quite impressed with myself for having done this. I'm quite heavily dyslexic and I've realised that I have a brilliant capability for writing things back to front. So, physio, Physio, Feldenkrais, Feldenkrais. I think the A is possibly back to front, but anyway, that gives you the background. So I've done a physiotherapy training. So I've done an undergraduate course, and I've gone on and done loads and loads of postgraduate courses in physiotherapy over the last 35 years. And I've worked clinically with people with all manner of issues, anything from the sort of what I call the more basic musculoskeletal issues of neck pain, back pain, shoulder pain, torn muscles, damaged muscles, broken bones, through to the sort of deeper pathologies of the amputations, the post-fracture orthopedic repair, neurological issues. So I've done a lot of work in that career, and as I say, I came across, having been working as a physio with Olympic teams, elite athletes, I came across this Feldenkrais work, and I decided that I was sufficiently interested after having gone off and done my basic lessons that I went off to, workshops, etc. I was interested enough that I wanted to go off and complete the Feldenkrais training, the 4-year part-time training, and take it back and use it with groups of people. And I have to admit, when I first went off on the course, I was a little frustrated that we weren't progressing at a certain pace, because I was used to attending certain kinds of training. And then I realised I needed to settle in and actually enjoy and luxuriate in the work for myself, which I did. So then I began to start to take it back, and I thought what would be useful is actually to go through a few of the differences that started to emerge right from the very beginning of me coming across this work, and one of the big changes that took place. So I've got another one of my famous diagrams here, also back to front. All right. I think you can read it down. This pyramid starts at the bottom with environment, then behaviour, above that capability, beliefs, identity, and right at the top spirituality. This is actually from something else that I've done over the years. This is actually to do with Robert Dilts, and it's to do with some NLP training I did. And this is about how we are. So let's say I started off the beginning of my training, and up here, there we go, identity. Part of my identity was me being a physio. So I had all of these different things that underpinned that in terms of the way that I was working. I had beliefs, obviously, about what it was that I was doing, how I was helping people, what my interventions were doing. I had capabilities, I had skills. I've been on lots of different forms of training courses over the years. I had learned to manipulate this and prod that and push this and stretch that and prescribe all sorts of programs of rehabilitation and goodness knows what. I had a certain form of behaviour, and I had an environment that I created. I've had a clinic, my own clinic, for the best part of, gosh, my son is 30 now, and I started working outside the NHS completely on my own, running contracted work and providing services to occupational health and GP surgeries and all over the place, and working for other people about 30 years ago. So I've had the environment, and when I came across this Feldenkrais work, there were a couple of big shifts that took place, and I'll explain why. One of the things that I came across very early on, both on the training, because as I say, when I went on the training, I thought I was going to be introduced to these techniques, that I was going to go away, a bit like these, these capabilities here. I was going to have a whole load of new capabilities and skills that I could use with people. And I realized there was a fundamental, and here it is, if you can read it. It's this old one. Know thyself. All right. So what is this principle, know thyself, and where does it fit in with what it is that I do in Feldenkrais work, which is slightly different from the work that I used to do when I was working as a physiotherapist. One of the things that happens when people go to see somebody, usually as a clinician, somebody has a problem when they come to see me. It might be that they've got pain, limitation of movement. It might be that their actual movement doesn't seem to be working okay. They've got a judder in the way they're moving, a neurological impairment. It might be they're rehabilitating after something. It might be because they've got a physical sense that their body is not performing, they're not using their body the way they want to. There's usually something that they want to make a change in. So when they come along, one of the approaches, thinking, one of the things that I came across that struck me quite early on in this Feldenkrais work was this business of know thyself. So why is know thyself very important when it comes to this, and what makes it very different from some of the classic medical interventions? Well, of course, when you go and see somebody and you have something that's, perhaps you're working with a clinician who says, well, you know, you've got back pain because when you stand, your back goes in, or when you stand on one leg. What tends to happen is that the person starts to justify themselves and say, well, of course, I won't do that anymore. I'm going to change what I do. And I noticed when I started my training, one of the things that I began to notice was that when I walked around and was working in an occupational health environment, I would have people who were sitting at their desks, and I could see how they were sitting from a distance. So I'd walk into a busy office with, say, 10 or 20 people working at desks, and I could look from the corner of the room and I could see people leaning to one side and, you know, phone underneath their ear and this sort of thing, or even sitting with their feet up on the desks. And when they saw me, the first thing they all did was, oh, I must sit up straight, sit up nice and straight. And I began to say to them, look, it's really important that what you do, she says, hoping she's going to hold it up there, is get to know yourself. Get to know what it is that you do all of the time, because habits, which is how we operate mostly, habits take a relatively short time to develop. And once we're able to do something in a habit, we keep it going. So by the time people start to have issues, the habit is really quite well ingrained. So the person who sits with their phone, you know, underneath their ear so that they can work away on their laptop like this, or who sits with their feet up on the desk, that's a habit. And if they begin to start to have issues, it's not as simple as just saying, oh, well, you've got to sit up straight, you've got to sit in this proper way, you've got to move the way you use yourself. Because if you have a habit, it feels comfortable, all right? One of the ways we check whether something feels comfortable is quite simple, and that's by doing the interlacing your fingers thing. So interlace your fingers, all right? So however you normally interlace them. So just interlace your fingers like that. Put one in front of the other. Just do what you'd normally do, okay? Notice which finger is in front, and then swap them over. Okay, so swap them over, all right? And feel what it feels like to swap them over. So it probably feels really quite odd when you do it. Okay, now put them back. When you put them back to the way that you'd normally put them, it probably feels, oh yes, that feels like me, all right? Okay, now do another one. Let's do another one. Fold your arms. Okay, just fold your arms, all right? Just fold your arms, and then have a look down. See which arm is the arm on top, and then change them over and see how that feels. Okay? When you have a habit, showing you blank piece of paper. Then I'm showing you upside down, right that way. If you don't know what it is that you do, For example, the people who sit with their legs up on the desk and slump over to one side and lean over the side of the chair for hours, or put their phone underneath here. And then they start to get symptoms. How on earth are they ever going to know what it is that they do on a day-to-day that causes them to have that problem? All right? Now, when I first started my training in Feldenkrais work, it was at a time when it was very popular to do something called core stability. I was working with the rowing squads at the time, and core stability had just come in to the UK as being almost the sort of the latest way to work with people. So we were busy analysing and appraising whether people had control over the movement of their pelvis in lying, or if they could maintain the position of their spine while they moved their arm and things like this. So this is going back to around 1990, 1992, and as a clinician, as part of a group of physiotherapists working with elite athletes, I attended I think it was either a 1 or a 2-day training course run by physiotherapists who were teaching us how to do this work. So the idea was that when somebody had a problem, we would take them out of the boat, they would spend time out of the boat, and we would retrain them to use themselves in a slightly different way. And what would happen is that maybe they might have to take a couple of months out from doing what they normally did, and we would work with them. And at the end of that couple of months period of time, what would happen is the chances are their symptoms would feel better. Now, of course, they hadn't been in the boat, they hadn't been rowing, they hadn't been doing what they would normally be doing. And at that point, we'd then put them back in, because we were able to see that they could control their pelvis, let's say, and move their leg, or they could do, you know, in prone kneeling, which is where you're on your hands and knees. They could keep their spine stable and move their arms and legs. They could differentiate the movement and put it together. So we'd put them back in the boat, and what would happen is that almost invariably, about 3 months later, they begin to start to get the problem again. Because as soon as they went back in and began to start to row, what happened was they went back into their old habits. And of course, what we weren't training them to do was to know thyself. So it became apparent to me, and this was just before I went on the training course, the 4-year Feldenkrais training course, it became apparent to me that we weren't actually addressing their habits. But what we were actually doing was we were teaching them control over certain muscle groups. We weren't changing the way that they were using themselves. And when I started to do the Feldenkrais training, of course, the classic way in physical therapy and medicine is don't do this, do that. So there's this quick shift, this quick process of stop doing this, start doing that, and the issue will resolve. Now, that is something that even today, when people come to see me at that what I call first aid stage, so supposing somebody comes to see me with very severe what we call neurological signs of a disc irritation, or an irritation of inflammation causing some sort of slight effect onto nerve tissue or circulatory tissue, which causes them to have very severe pain. At that stage of the first aid process, what I want is for them to actually understand what it is that's causing them to irritate their symptoms. Because as soon as they understand that, they can make some changes, they can put some strategies in place, and their body begins to start to heal. Because that's what the body does. If you carry on doing, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. However, if somebody wants to have a thorough non-recurrence of an issue, then what they need to do is they need to get to know themselves. They need to actually get to love themselves and all their quirky little ways. So it's perfectly okay for the person to tuck their phone underneath their shoulder like this and work away, if what they do is just to do it for a short period of time. But if they don't realise that what they're doing is they're doing this for 7 hours a day, every day, and then they've got the habit into, you know, putting the phone under here when they're in the kitchen chopping up vegetables, and then they're sitting with their head over to one side, and then what happens is they start to get an issue with that. If they don't know thyself, if they don't know themselves, if they don't know that this is part of what they do and who they are and how it works for them, then of course what's going to happen is that the the problem that they've had is going to resolve. And this doesn't just apply physically, of course it applies cognitively, it applies to who we are as people. So this is about our makeup, our personality. If we've got a certain way of behaviour, it's going to tend to be who we are. So one of the things that we do in Feldenkrais work is, and the way that the Feldenkrais approach is differs from, say, something like conventional clinical work. See, I'm good at this writing backwards, Lark, aren't I? Is we go deeper. So it's a bit like lingering and savouring the opportunity to actually really get to know what it is that you do, and doing it without a sense of, oh no, I mustn't do that. It's okay, because a habit serves you well. If somebody sits at the desk and puts their feet on the desk and leans over to one side, it's probably because they feel quite comfortable doing it. If they tuck their phone underneath their ear when they're keying in, it's something they've learnt to do, and the habit works for them. But if people can have the interest to want to go deeper, this is really where the learning in Feldenkrais work differs so much from physio. Because in physio, in clinical terms and in most forms of medicine, we're either putting an intervention in to say you can carry on doing things the way you want to do them, and then we're going to support you with these drugs. Like you can take some anti-inflammatories on a regular basis, or you can take some gabapentin for your pain, and you can do exactly what it is that you want to do that you did before. Or you can work with somebody to actually understand that maybe if what they did was to make a few adjustments, to go a bit deeper, to understand the earlier signs and symptoms that they might be beginning to start to kick off when they're doing what they do. For example, we know that pain is an incredibly complex brain system produced effect. And if somebody, let's say, gets pain when they are in certain situations and circumstances, let's say, I'll give you a really good example of one here. I had a girl who came to see me many years ago, and she had really quite severe symptoms that were not improving. And when she went into work, the symptoms were worse. And when no, wrong piece of paper, where is it? When we went a bit deeper, what happened, or what started to come out, was that it turned out that she'd had a relationship issue and she'd split up with her partner, and they were still sitting next to each other at work. And work had insisted that they couldn't move. So every day when she went into work, she was confronted with this idea that she was going to sit next to this person who she was no longer in relationship with. And even the thought of going into work was going to cause her stress. And then when she was sitting there during the day, the whole dynamic, what would make her want to go to work? And what had started off as a small irritation was then magnified by her tensing up during the day, by her emotional state, by her psychological state. Being off work, she'd felt better. What was the motivation to want to go back? As soon as she thought of going back to work, she had pain. And we needed to go a bit deeper. And for her, some of the issues that needed to be addressed were not physical issues, to have treatment on a soft tissue injury or whatever. She needed some emotional resilience training. She needed some support to be able to actually, she didn't need gabapentin and painkillers. What she needed was a whole global approach to sorting out the issue. And once she began to start to go deeper, and she was able to start to think, gosh, there's a relationship between the physical and how I am in myself, she was able to begin to start to realize this was something that she could learn to control. And I think this is something that is still there. I'm somewhere in the region, I'm 15 years, 20 years after I've done my Feldenkrais training. It was 2000 when I completed my training, with 2015 now. We're 15 years down the road, and yet we are still in a situation where people go to the doctor or come to see me, and I say, let me have a look at the way you're standing, and they go, oh dear, I really do stand badly. I stand, I know, I'm standing that shoulder down, it's really bad, I must stand like this. And I say, no, it's okay, know thyself. Know thyself, and holding things upside down. Know thyself. Know that you have a habit and say habits are cool. Alright, so habits are cool, habits work, and remember that if you didn't have a habit, you wouldn't be able to remember how to roll over in the morning and get out of bed, because you'd spend all your time trying to work out what was the first thing you needed to do. Rolling over in bed and getting up in the morning is a habit. You roll over, you just do it, you don't think about it. Alright? So this is why I say one of the important things and one of the differences I'd like to highlight between a classic medical clinical physio approach to managing an issue and a Feldenkrais approach is know thyself, know thy habits, go deeper, and then you can begin to start to think about how you, at an identity level, are able to make changes in yourself, because you'll have an increased capability. It will have an effect on your behaviour, your environments, and your beliefs. So you can go quite deeply with this stuff. So hopefully that's helpful, and we'll do some more again later on. Take care.